The decline of the British Empire can be traced back to a pivotal incident in 1956, the Suez Crisis. By the mid-20th century, Britain's influence on the global stage was already diminishing, yet it clung to the notion of its imperial dominance. The crisis was ignited when Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, prompting Britain, in covert collaboration with France and Israel, to orchestrate a military intervention aimed at reclaiming control. This action was predicated on the assumption that the international community would acquiesce to British demands. This miscalculation proved catastrophic. Britain failed to acknowledge the emergence of a new global order, with the United States rising as a superpower. The U.S. expressed its outrage over being sidelined in the decision-making process. Confronted with economic sanctions from Washington and widespread diplomatic rebuke at the United Nations, Britain was compelled to execute a public withdrawal, marking a profound humiliation. Although the military operation could be viewed as a tactical success, it resulted in a strategic failure of monumental proportions. It was a stark revelation that Britain could no longer operate autonomously on the world stage. The empire's authority was not dismantled by a competing power, but rather eroded by its own ally and the prevailing global sentiment. The prime minister resigned, and the credibility of the empire suffered an irreparable blow. This episode exemplifies the pattern of imperial overreach in its twilight years. A desperate and unilateral attempt to reassert control over a vital asset, executed without a true grasp of the evolving geopolitical landscape. It illustrates the actions of a power that recalls its former strength yet remains oblivious to its current vulnerabilities. The reliance on military force to address geopolitical challenges while disregarding economic interdependencies and the rise of new power centers epitomizes the final, grand miscalculation of a waning empire. The echoes of this historical moment resonate in contemporary geopolitics. The United States finds itself grappling with its own perceived decline, facing strategic vulnerabilities and the allure of reasserting dominance through high-stakes interventions to safeguard its interests. The pressing question is not if America will encounter a Suez moment, but when it will occur and what issues will precipitate it. The stage is set for a potentially defining misstep. So, what constitutes America's Suez Canal? It is not a single waterway, but a foundational pillar of its 21st century dominance, the US dollar's status as the world's reserve currency. For decades, the petrodollar system and global financial infrastructure have been the bedrock of American power, enabling sanctions, funding deficits, and projecting influence. This is America's strategic asset, now perceived as under threat. The pattern emerges clearly. Like Britain clinging to its imperial roots, the U.S. is increasingly viewing challenges to dollar hegemony as existential. The rise of alternative financial systems, digital currencies, and bilateral trade agreements bypassing the dollar are seen not as market evolution, but as direct attacks to be countered. The overreach occurs in the response, the weaponization of financial tools against larger, more economically integrated rivals. Just as Britain used military force in a world that had moved beyond accepting it, America risks using financial force in a world increasingly capable of circumventing it. The potential trigger: a drastic, unilateral financial action against a major economy between now and 2026. Imagine a scenario where, facing a geopolitical crisis, the U.S. moves to freeze or seize assets on a scale far beyond anything seen with Russia. The intent would be to deliver a knockout blow, but the result would be the very thing it seeks to prevent: a catastrophic, coordinated flight from the dollar by nations fearing they could be next. The tool of supremacy would become the catalyst for its collapse. This would be the modern Suez, a swift, decisive action intended to showcase strength, which instead reveals the underlying fragility and provokes a unified backlash from allies and adversaries alike. It would accelerate the creation of the alternative systems it aims to destroy. The empire, in a final spasm of control, would demonstrate it has lost it. The British at Suez fatally misjudged to actors their American ally and the rising force of global public opinion. They believed old alliances and imperial prestige would shield them from consequence. America today risks an identical miscalculation, misreading the loyalty of its financial network and the resilience of its rivals. In 1956, the United States, under President Eisenhower, faced a stark choice: support its Cold War allies Britain and France, or uphold the new principle of national self-determination and side with global sentiment against colonialism. It chose the latter, leveraging its economic power to force a British retreat. The Atlantic Alliance was shaken to its core. The empire was abandoned by its most important progeny. Today, the network is financial. The supposed loyalty is not of a military alliance, but of countries and institutions tied to the dollar-based system from Europe to the Gulf states to emerging economies. America's potential Suez-level mistake assumes this network's compliance and the helplessness of its targets. It assumes that when pressed, nations will have no choice but to accept the destabilizing shock of sudden financial warfare. This is the critical blindness. The target of a major 2026-style sanctions event, likely China or a coalition, will not be Russia in 2022. It will be an economy with deep, pre-established alternative channels, larger global trade flows, and the capacity to immediately enact contingency plans. More dangerously, America misjudges the fence-sitters. For nations like India, Saudi Arabia, or Brazil, such an event would not be a call to pick a side, but urgent warning to diversify away from both sides to ensure their own economic survival. The unified global financial order, the very source of American leverage, would fragment overnight not by conquest, but by defensive reaction. The backlash would not be a military coalition, but a quiet, rapid, and irreversible financial realignment. The empire's final mistake is always believing the system it built is too big to fail and that its subjects are too dependent to leave. History shows they always find a way. The year 2026 is not an arbitrary date. It represents a point of convergence where long-term trends meet short-term political pressures, creating the perfect conditions for a historic miscalculation. Multiple clocks are ticking toward this horizon. First, the technological clock. By 2026, China's cross-border interbank payment system (SIPS) and its digital currency electronic payment (DCEP) platform will have reached significant maturity and global integration. These are not mere prototypes, but operational alternatives to SWIFT and dollar settlements. They represent a tangible exit ramp, ready for mass adoption should a crisis provide the impetus. Second, the political clock. The United States will be in the throes of another intense electoral cycle. Political rhetoric will demand demonstrations of strength and decisive action against perceived adversaries. The pressure on any administration to do something concrete about China's rise or another geopolitical challenge will be immense. This domestic political environment mirrors the jingoistic fervor in Britain and France that propelled the Suez invasion, a climate where aggressive action is praised and cautious diplomacy is framed as weakness. Third, the economic clock. Predictions suggest a potential global recessionary window around this period. Historically, empires under severe economic stress at home are more likely to engage in external gambles to divert attention and reassert dominance. A wounded giant is the most dangerous to others and to itself. A potential flashpoint. A crisis over Taiwan, a major sanctions breach, or a catastrophic cyber attack on financial infrastructure could provide the spark. In the heated moment, with political capital on the line and a belief in overwhelming financial weaponry, the decision to pull the ultimate lever could be made. It would be presented as a bold, surgical strike to end a threat. In reality, it would be the moment the network shatters, proving America's power has limits and inviting the world to build a new system without it. This is how the echo becomes reality. The story of empires is not ultimately about economics or armies. It is about psychology. It is about the crippling inertia of a winning mindset applied to a changed world. The British in 1956 could not conceive of a world where they followed rather than led. That failure of imagination was their undoing. The United States now stands at the same psychological precipice. The warning is not that it will collapse, but that it is perfectly poised to engineer its own pivotal decline through a single, avoidable catastrophe. The Suez Moment is not an invasion, it is the moment an empire, in a final assertion of its old rules, proves to the world that those rules are obsolete. It is the self-inflicted wound that turns managed decline into irreversible descent. The path away from this fate does not require the abandonment of power, but its wiser application. It requires the humility Britain lacked to recognize that true strength in the 21st century lies in reinforcing the multilateral systems you built, not in unilaterally breaking them when inconvenienced. It means leading through reliable partnership, not through coercive shock. It means understanding that the dollar's privilege is a trust, not a weapon, and that once that trust is shattered, it cannot be reclaimed. The year 2026 looms not as a prophecy, but as a choice. The mechanisms are in place, the pressures are building, and the pattern is clear. History has provided the blueprint of the final mistake. The question remains, will America have the vision to read it? Or will it, like old empires before it, be blinded by the fading light of its own supremacy until the new dawn arrives and finds it alone in the dark? The pattern echoes. The only unknown is the response.